Hi, I'm Luke Gilfillan. Welcome to the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. Hello, and welcome back to the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. Today we're going to be looking at... What are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at the issue of reopening schools. So yesterday, July 10th, the New York Times editorial board wrote, "Reopening schools will be a huge undertaking. It must be done." So the New York Times editorial board is now coming out in favor of reopening schools, just after, I believe, our school board has drafted a plan to not reopen the schools against the advice of the American Pediatric Association and with the advice of concerned Facebook moms who will go against the American Pediatrics Association, the New York Times, and basically every person that knows the mortality rates for individual age groups, and will still yet have the nerve to claim that those that oppose them are anti-science. All right, so I guess we'll just read this article. American children need public schools to open in the fall. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are not even half of it. Kids need to learn how to compete and cooperate. They need food and friendships, books and basketball courts, time away from family, and a safe place to spend it. Parents need public schools too. They need help raising their children, and they need to work. In Britain, the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health has warned that leaving schools closed risks scarring the life chances of a generation of young people. The organization's American counterpart, the American Academy of Pediatrics, has urged administrators to begin from a goal of having students physically present in school. Here's what it's going to take: more money and more space. The return to school, as with other aspects of pre-pandemic normalcy, rests on the nation's ability to control the spread of the coronavirus. In communities where the virus is spreading rapidly, school is likely to remain virtual. The rise in case counts across much of the country is jeopardizing even the best-laid plans for classroom education. Other nations are checking the spread of the virus and preparing to reopen school. America, by contrast, is squandering its chance and failing its children. But even in places where the virus is under control, schools lack the means to safely provide full-time instruction. In New York City, the nation's largest school district, says that it can only safely provide a few days each week for in-person instruction. Other large districts, like Fairfax County, Virginia, and Clark County, Nevada, have announced similar plans for a partial return to the classroom in the fall. To maximize in-person instruction, the federal government must open its checkbook. Districts need hundreds of billions of dollars to cover the gap between the rapid decline in tax revenue caused by the virus and the rapid rise in costs also caused by the virus. Guidelines published by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention recommend, among other things, the installation of physical barriers in common areas, increased cleaning and daily health checks. The School Superintendents Association estimates that necessary protective measures would cost about $1.8 million for an average district of 8 schools and 3,500 students. With more than 13,000 school districts in the United States, the total adds up. House Democrats passed a bill in May that included some aid for schools, but Senate Republicans have neither considered it nor passed an alternative. President Trump could set an example by wearing a mask and urging states to wear masks. He could work to expand testing. He could work to get money into schools. Instead, Trump has sent tweets demanding in all caps that schools reopen, and this is the New York Times editorial board, demanding in all caps that schools reopen and threatening to cut off existing federal funding. Crucially, money alone is not enough. If safety dictates that classrooms can hold only half as many students, it follows that schools need twice as much room. Some of that space can be found by repurposing gyms and cafeterias, but districts, including New York, have cited a lack of space as a key reason students won't be able to return full-time. Officials need to think outside the building. Some fall classes could be held in open air or under tents with no walls. Spaces in which the available evidence suggests transmission risks are also much lower. In Denmark, schools held spring classes on playgrounds, in public parks, and even in stands of the National Soccer Stadium. So for Oak Park, we have basically half the square block that the school takes up is a park, baseball fields, and other stuff. So that for outdoors, so being outdoors is probably not too hard of an issue, especially if you set up large tents with heating. You could do that during the winter. Have some classrooms take place in large tents. If you want to take rid of 2/3 or 1/3 of the students in each classroom, that clears up a lot of space. You can move those 1/3 of people into the cafeteria, the auditorium, field house, all those spaces. We could fit the entire school into the field house, and obviously we're not going to be able to do instruction in there or keep as many people in there because we can't have many people together, but you can have a lot of people in the field house for instruction. And honestly, even getting behind on the education, that's not really the main focus. You just keep kids out of school, that can be a real issue. I know there are some parents who have had to put their children on antidepressants during the lockdown, so that's certainly a health issue. And it is worth recognizing that the New York Times doesn't say this, but the risk to children from coronavirus is virtually zero. It's 1/3 of the risk to the flu according to the CDC mortality rates. Now, it is 3 times more transmissible, but in terms of an individual student going to school each day, if you were to tell a student, if you go to school this year, you will catch the flu, they wouldn't panic and not stay home. So if you tell someone, oh, you're going to go to school and you will catch coronavirus and you'll catch something 1/3 of the mortality of the flu, they'll be like, okay, so. But it's got a new name and it's been in the headlines for so long, and it is more dangerous to elderly people, so that's why people are so concerned about it. Some states, including Florida, Minnesota, and Connecticut, have encouraged schools to use other available outdoor space, particularly in cities where space is scarce. Officials should be given serious consideration of closing streets around schools and holding classes there. Under the circumstances, public education is surely the best use of those public spaces. Outdoor education is not a cure-all. Students would need to use shared bathrooms. Equipment will still need to be stored in buildings. Environmental conditions are also a limiting factor: heat, rain, high winds, and air pollution. But American communities need to choose among the available options. The limits of virtual classrooms were on painful display this spring. While some students thrived, or at least continued to learn, others faded away. Boston reported that roughly 20% of enrolled students never logged in. In Los Angeles, 1/3 of high schoolers failed to participate. In Washington, D.C., the school system simply gave up and ended the school year 3 weeks early. That's basically what we did, right? Evidence suggests schools partially struggled to reach lower-income kids, exasperating performance gaps. The closures have also deprived students of time with friends, limited their access to reliable meals, physical and mental health care, and reduced the availability of support for those with special needs. Students have been thrown back into the resources of their families, and in every dimension, those with the fewest resources have tended to suffer most, a pattern certain to continue into the fall. The economic damage is real, too. The consulting firm McKinsey estimates that 27 million American workers require childcare, which includes schools, and return to full-time work. Another issue with the closing schools that has been on display even at the beginning of this pandemic is a lot of nurses and, well, workers generally, but nurses are especially needed right now. They have children that they need to send to school because otherwise they're going to have to stay home, which limits the medical capacity of our healthcare system and presents a problem for coronavirus patients because they might not get equipment, though that's not really shown to be happening. Many teachers and parents are wary of reopening schools. They fear policymakers will cut corners and safety measures will prove inadequate. These fears have been reinforced by the president and by Vice President Mike Pence, both of whom have publicly encouraged corner cutting. Such a strategy is willingly short-sighted. It might succeed in reopening schools for a time, but it is not likely to allow schools to remain open. This week, the president and vice president called on the CDC to relax its public health guidelines for safely reopening schools. The agency director, Dr. Robert Redfield, refused. The lesson here is for local officials to ignore the president and as well take the measure of the best available science, implement the necessary safety measures, and maximize the amount of time that children can spend in classrooms. All right, so that is the New York Times editorial board talking about how schools should be reopened. Hopefully the school board will listen, but this is unlikely because here's the dirty little secret. We're having a $36 million renovation coming up this year, and if you want to save up the money for that, you know it would cut costs not having kids physically in school next year. All right, thanks so much for listening, and